So anyone who's been around the space for long enough, as we'll call it, you have probably seen testimonies even from other men, or just the subject of men walking away from society, quitting dating and relationships. And what it's ultimately come down to is that men with self-respect and dignity are not going to play these games anymore. And it's not even just men that have been beaten down and men getting emasculated in relationships like I've mentioned in previous videos, but it's also men being emasculated. Men being brought down and wanting to have nothing to do with society because of their upbringing. And I remember at a very young age growing up, not only just in the schools, but there was this very common trope that I remember in media, pretty much every classic movie and TV show that I can remember from the 90s and early 2000s had this kind of comedic trope where the husband was displayed as incompetent. The woman was strong and independent, having to walk the clumsy husband through life. Most, if not all of them, were like this. And apart from that, what they have done was having something that used to be a comedic trope now becoming a reality. A lot of relationships are handled in this kind of manner. I mean, the amount of disrespect that I've seen from people that are in relationships is absolutely off the charts. There's been many times where I would hang out with people, they'd be in the car with me, and I've talked about this previously, but I would overhear the conversations between them and their girlfriend, yelling at them, emasculating them, knowing that there's another man in their presence, trying to humiliate them publicly. And that's the thing I've seen a lot too, is this kind of public humiliation. And as men, it's so hard too, because to deal with it, you think, right? You don't want to lash out. You certainly don't want to do anything physical, as you shouldn't. You don't want to be rude and disrespectful. But what it comes down to is us as men need to stop pandering to women. And I'll tell you what, that's the thing that men really need to do better at. That's the thing that men need to get better at, is not tolerating this kind of disrespect. I'll say it straight up. I would rather be celibate for the rest of my life than be in one of these toxic relationships where I'm being beaten down and emasculated seemingly on a daily basis. Even I was at a Mexican restaurant a few days ago, and I oversaw a couple coming in. They were probably in their 60s. And the wife took a seat, and the husband took a seat, and the wife's like, "Oh, we need to switch chairs so you can see the dog in the car and watch your dog," and this and that. And the man just kind of submissively just got up and switched chairs. And just the body language and having his head down, he was looking around, he noticed the restaurant was packed, thinking, why is this woman, why is my wife humiliating me, trying to test me in public? So ask yourself this. Men are not going to want to play part in these kind of games at all. They're not going to want to play part in it. And the sad thing is, like I mentioned, this whole trope with movies and stuff earlier, let's think about it this way. Most movies that we've seen, they have an antagonist and a protagonist, right? They have a hero and a villain. They've been able to find a way through our upbringing to make masculinity seem like the villain. So, and really just masculinity just for existing. Of course, abusive men are wrong. Of course, narcissistic men are wrong. But what I don't think a lot of people understand is those are not masculine men. Those are weak traits. That's a complete opposite of masculine. If you had masculinity, you would not have those kind of things. Being manipulative is not a masculine trait. It is the complete opposite, I would argue, if anything. So we have now men growing up confused, women growing up more confused and miserable than ever before. Young men not knowing how to be a man, especially if they've come from a single-parent household, which unfortunately is a very common thing, in particular, single-mother household. Even since elementary school, I remember this thing where, or I remember even throughout my kind of student or career tenure, whatever you want to call it, a lot of the kids I knew growing up were from other parts of the city, which I will say that was one of the few positive things I can take away from public school, was getting to know a lot of people from different backgrounds and upbringings. But seeing people who grew up in these single parent, in particular single mother households, where they didn't have a father in the household, and seeing them just be beaten down and told that there is something, or implied that there is something wrong with them just for being a man. Do you think that these men are going to want to contribute. And I've seen it, a lot of men just completely shut up. They want to have nothing to do with it. A lot of people I knew growing up dropped out of school because they were let down. Now, of course, you could say that people need to take accountability. I understand that. But growing up in the public school system, they were let down. These were not bad kids. Look at it this way. When you're growing up and you're told that women should outgrow men and that is their goal, you are told that a man is what is holding back a woman's potential, and that the woman's goal should be to outcompete a man. And if you're a man, if you're a boy, perhaps, in this circumstance, in school, and you were shown that you are disposable with the whole Miss Independent stuff. I mean, I'll put it this way. I took one AP class in high school, and 80% of that class was female. 80% was female. They did not have the best interest of the young men in that school, at least the school I was in. I can't speak for every single school in the country or in the state, but I've heard a very common thing from stories I've heard from people I've talked to with a similar experience growing up, where men are essentially, they're told that there's something wrong with them, and now men do not know how to behave like men when they get into adulthood. And this has absolutely caused damage to friendships. It's normal throughout life to distance yourself from people, especially around the time that you graduate high school. You are not in the same confinements, the same few hundred or few thousand people, depending on the size of your high school. If you have no desire to associate with someone through adulthood, you have that option. But a lot of those people that I noticed that I ended up cutting off or distancing myself from, they were definitely people who did not know how to act like men because they were led astray. They were confused growing up. They were told or implied that there was something wrong with them, and a lot of the times they saw the man in their household, the husband in their house, which is even worse that I've seen, like the neighborhood I grew up in, I would imagine had a very low rate of single motherhood. But probably a very common occurrence of husbands being the laughingstock and being humiliated, much like they are in these sitcoms and stuff we grew up with, where the husbands are mocked in the TV shows and in the movies. And really, masculinity was ultimately turned on its head. So you have a lot of men now who are insecure. You have a lot of men now that have had to seek and really find masculine role models. And I'll tell you guys something straight up. When I graduated high school, when I got out of this kind of system, the only thing that I really had was a lot of anger and resentment. And it took me years to get over that. What it ultimately took was, I remember in community college, my second year there, I was all over the place. I wasn't taking school seriously. I didn't know why I was there, to be completely honest with you. I was taking just general education courses. But I remember a professor by the name of Dr. Michael Fawcett. He was an older gentleman. He emailed me towards the end of the quarter. I wasn't showing up to class. I was barely showing up to class, barely turning in work. I was just an angry, resentful young man. And he told me that he wants to see me succeed, that he wants to help me, that he wants to give me another chance. So he gave me an extension to complete the coursework and stuff like that. And that was the first time in my life that I have seen real brotherhood and respect as a male growing up in the public education system. The first time. And I think to myself, how many young men did not get to see those things, did not get to see that. They had this cold view. And quite frankly, it's why a lot of men are quitting society. They're quitting dating, which I'm going to get into. I have a lot to say on that. And I don't blame them at all. You disrespect someone enough times, you low blow after low blow after low blow, they are going to want to walk away. Do you think these men are going to want to be part of this? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. If women in relationships cooperated and understood, and let me get this straight, a child needs a man, or rather a father and a mother. They need both parents growing up. If a lot of women, they understood that instead of trying to compete with the man, you'd get those good men. You'd get those good men to want to now date, to want to now be part of this. But until these family court laws and stuff like that change, until these kind of dynamics are different, you're not going to see them return to dating. No way. I don't care at all. And I'm not going to play these games and walk over eggshells just to be in a relationship. That's not going to happen. Like I said, that's the thing that a lot of men need to do better as well, is not tolerate this kind of disrespect. Because I'm not going to get it twisted or whatever. I've seen a lot of women who are working these jobs like baristas, waitresses, doing all this kind of stuff on social media, and they have an army of men that are just giving them the attention, giving them the validation. And of course that needs to stop. That is something that some men need to do better at. But you cannot deny this fact that and even a lot of women, I think, will agree with me on this, whether it's friendships or relationships with women. There is something seriously wrong with a lot of women nowadays, especially when it comes to relationships. And I would just say in general, there's something seriously wrong with a lot of them. And it's so funny too, because they'll say not to speak in absolutes or not to generalize, but why is it that so many men feel this disdain towards them and are treated like crap? When you have educators like this that are pushing this kind of stuff, do you think they have the best interests of their student? People can talk about things that happened however many decades or centuries ago. But how is it the young boy's fault who's bussed in from across the city, who already is dealing with personal stuff in the home? You never know what kind of things are going on with them or their family. Is this now what you want, them to feel walked all over and disrespected? You think they're going to want to contribute and be part of this? You think they're not going to want to quit dating? You think they're not going to want to really just find a way to not play part in this? It's the most backwards thing I've ever seen. So ultimately what it comes down to is that I've seen a lot of women, with the way they deal with relationships, just being completely backwards. I remember my first quarter of community college. There was a girl that was in a math class of mine, and we would talk on a daily basis. We would go to the library and study together. This girl would go as far to pass the touch barrier, whatever you want to call it, would rest on my shoulder while we were in the library studying. I remember one time we were walking, and again, I was a lot younger. Didn't have the discernment, didn't have the experience, didn't have videos and channels to help with that kind of stuff. I had to learn the hard way. But I remember I said something along the lines of how she was just kind of, what I saw as flirting, what really is flirting. Sharing, taking bites out of the same food that I was eating. And she said, "Oh, well, you're just a guy in a math class," and blah, blah, implying that it's no big deal. That's complete manipulation. I came to find out she was actually dating some guy at the time. She was 18 years old and had slept with like 8 different people, 8 different men. And by the way, this is not some girl off a dating app or a nightclub or a bar. This is a girl who was at a college, sure, community college, but still at a college and a library. There's something seriously wrong with that. And of course, I don't like to speak through, just anecdotal evidence. But why is it that every man that I've talked to knows someone, whether it's a friend directly, family member directly, but knows someone who has gone through a toxic relationship, who has dealt with family court, who has dealt with some kind of crazy divorce, slander and defamation made against them? And what's so crazy now too is, like I said, with how men are being torn down a lot of the time. I'll say it straight up. You can learn about female nature dealing with some men nowadays because they've been so emasculated through their upbringing. Like, I knew people growing up where they would do things that was just absolutely the complete opposite of masculine. I remember there was someone who, just as a joke, as a complete joke, when I was in the gym, and this was a friend of mine, we would talk all the time, I challenged him to a deadlift competition. And he just absolutely lost it. He tried to say that I was stalking him or something like that. I'm like, do you think a real man speaks like that? Do you think a man taught him to speak and act like that? Or do you think it was maybe a toxic single mother or a toxic woman who was disrespecting the man in the relationship if he had a father in the home? Or a teacher growing up to tell him that there is something wrong with handling things like a man? Keep in mind, this was just a joke. It was fun, just fun banter between friends. Like I said, there's such a thing, obviously, as toxic competition, but also friendly competition, where it has no bad implications. But men are not going to want to play part in these games anymore. Like, I remember even growing up, people would tell me to make a social media account, people buying followers and just doing all these weird things for women. Again, that's the thing men need to stop doing. They need to stop pandering and basing their entire existence on female attention. That's why they need to find their mission. They need to find their purpose. But I'll tell you what, looking from the outside, a man with self-respect, I'll put it straight up, they're not going to play part in this. They are not going to want to play part in this. Not at all. So don't be surprised when they walk away. And ladies watching, don't be surprised when you don't see men wanting to date anymore. That's just the reality of it. Anyone who's going to deny that, I just think they're totally wrong. And I've been big on this channel of health being important. I'm not just talking about physical health. I'm talking about your overall well-being and peace of mind, and myself included, as millions of other men. They're going to choose their peace and solitude over chaos 100% of the time. As always, guys, I appreciate you viewing the video. Hope it gives us a good one. Thank you.